Okay, so you're here because you really want to understand Rwanda's history, especially leading up to the 20th century.
That's right.
And that's exactly what we're going to do today.
It is.
We're going to give you that fast track to a real understanding straight from the source.
Yeah, it's straight from the source.
We've got some amazing historical records for you guys today, including stuff from UNESCO and Rwanda's National Archives.
That's right. And we're going to be exploring the story of Rwanda.
The land of 1,000 hills.
That's right. The land of 1,000 hills and a nation with a very, very compelling story, journey of social, political, and economic transformation.
Absolutely. So our deep dive today is really focused on Rwanda's past.
Yes.
Starting from its very, very beginning.
The very beginning.
All the way to the 20th century.
All the way up.
Okay, so let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Where does this huge history even begin?
Well, we began at the very beginning with prehistory and the early settlements, roughly from 1000 BC to around 700, 800 AD. Archaeological evidence points to a human presence in the region as far back as the Stone Age.
Stone Age. Okay.
Yeah.
So who are these very first people?
Well, what is particularly significant is the subsequent Bantu migration.
Okay.
And this wasn't just a movement of people, it fundamentally reshaped the landscape and the skill set, bringing in things like agriculture, ironworking.
So that really changed things.
It did. It really did. It led to more permanent settlements.
Okay, so the Bantu migration laid down like a real base layer for the region.
Absolutely.
What did those societies actually look like back then?
Well, the evidence we have suggests that these early Rwandan communities were primarily organized around clans and strong family connections.
Interesting.
So what's interesting to note here is that at this stage, social organization was based more on these kingship bonds.
Okay.
Rather than the ethnic distinctions that would emerge later.
Right.
This early emphasis on clan ties, predating rigid ethnic categories, gives you a really insightful initial perspective on Rwandan social structure.
That is a really crucial point for you to grasp.
Yeah.
The idea that these initial social structures weren't based on what we now understand as Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa identities.
Not at this point.
Not at this point.
Yeah.
So then how did they actually transform into this more centralized kingdom that we always hear about?
Yeah, well, the shift to the Kingdom of Rwanda was a gradual process.
Okay.
It really took several centuries to solidify around the 14th century and developing into a centralized monarchy by the 16th century.
Okay.
So before this, the region was more of a collection of smaller, independent chiefdoms.
I see.
So it wasn't unified.
Okay, so what was the real driving force behind this unification then?
Well, a key factor was the rise and expansion of the Nyiginya dynasty.
Okay.
And King Ruganzu II, Dori in particular, is remembered for expanding the kingdom's territory through conquest.
Right.
So this period really illustrates the historical development of power and how that territorial control was actually established.
So under the Nyiginya dynasty, how was the kingdom governed?
Good question.
What were the administrative systems like for the people?
Well, the kingdom developed a very structured political system at the top. Was the Mwami, the king, who held absolute authority.
Wow.
So below him were chiefs with specific areas of responsibility. So you had chiefs overseeing land known as Ubutaka, military affairs,
Ingabo,
and cattle, which was incredibly important both economically and socially, through a system called
Ubuhai. Okay.
So this gives you a picture of the kingdom's hierarchical organization and those different pillars of administration.
Ubutaka, Ingabo, Ubuhake.
Yeah, key terms.
Key terms. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that social organization wasn't based on rigid ethnicity back then.
It wasn't.
So how did those client-patron relationships actually work within that context?
Well, this reinforces the earlier point about the fluidity of identity.
Okay.
Social organization was largely based on these reciprocal relationships.
Okay.
But individuals would pledge loyalty and service to a more powerful figure.
Right.
In exchange for protection or resources.
Oh. Okay.
And these relationships weren't fixed by birth into a particular ethnic group.
Interesting.
Which is what later became the case.
Right.
So this highlights that the identities that we often associate with Rwanda today are not these ancient, immutable categories.
Okay. That's really important for us to understand as we move forward.
It is.
Now, of course, the arrival of the Europeans brought some huge transformations to the area.
Huge transformations.
Let's talk about the colonial period.
Oh.
First under the Germans.
Okay.
And then under the Belgians.
Right.
What happened there?
Well, this era, spanning from 1897 to 1962, marks a significant turning point.
Okay.
Initially, in 1897, Rwanda became part of German East Africa.
Okay.
However, the German administration was relatively light.
Okay.
They largely employed indirect rule.
Interesting. What is indirect rule?
So essentially, instead of directly governing, the Germans primarily worked through the existing local power structures.
Okay, so they were present.
They were present.
But not heavily involved in the day-to-day.
Not really,
Yeah.
no. And that situation shifted with the arrival of the Belgians.
Okay.
After World War I around 1916.
Okay.
The Belgian administration really intensified that administrative control.
Okay.
And this is where a truly consequential and ultimately tragic development occurred.
Uh-oh.
The Belgians introduced ethnic identity cards.
Ethnic identity cards. What impact did that have?
Well, what's both fascinating and deeply disturbing
All right.
is how this seemingly administrative tool solidified the divisions between Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa.
Right.
And these categories, which, as we discussed, were not rigid before,
Right.
became formalized and deeply entrenched through these identity documents.
Wow.
This is a pivotal moment
Yeah.
with profound and lasting consequences for Rwandan society.
Really goes to show the power of these bureaucratic tools to reshape things, doesn't it?
Absolutely a stark warning about the power of these tools to reshape identity and to really fuel division.
So it seems very bureaucratic, but had a huge social impact.
It did a huge impact.
What other influences did the Belgians bring to the region?
Well, Catholic missionaries also became quite influential during this period,
Okay.
particularly in the areas of education and even governance.
Okay.
So their presence added another layer to the evolving social and political landscape.
So this period of colonial rule led to independence, but it sounds like not without a lot of conflict.
Yeah, that's right. The 1959 Hutu Revolution resulted in the abolition of the monarchy,
Okay.
which had historically been associated with the Tutsi population.
Okay.
So this was a period of significant social and political unrest, ultimately paving the way for Rwanda's independence in 1962.
Okay, so independence achieved, but it sounds like those seeds of division that were sown during colonial times were still kind of growing
They were.
in these newly formed republics. So let's talk about the first and second republics
Okay.
in Rwanda.
So the First Republic, spanning from 1962 to 1973, under President Gregoire Kayibanda,
Okay.
witnessed the rise of Hutu nationalism. And this unfortunately led to the political exclusion and marginalization of the Tutsi population.
Wow.
A stark contrast to the earlier, more fluid social dynamics we talked about.
So these categories the Belgians made became the basis for political exclusion
Exactly.
during the First Republic.
That's right.
Wow. Okay, so then the Second Republic?
The Second Republic from 1973 to 1994 under President Juvenal Habyarimana.
Okay.
And while there was stability due to single-party rule under the MRND,
Okay.
underlying economic hardships and ethnic tensions persisted,
So they were just below the surface.
just below the surface.
And then we see the emergence of the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front.
Yes, in 1990, the RPF launched a military offensive from neighboring Uganda.
Okay.
And this event really escalated the existing tensions within Rwanda, creating a climate of instability and fear.
Of course, but there were some attempts at peace, the Arusha Accords.
Yes, the Arusha Peace Accords in 1993 represented a really significant effort
Okay.
to establish a power-sharing agreement between the government and the RPF. However, hardline elements within the Rwandan government actively obstructed their implementation,
Oh, no.
tragically setting the stage for the horrors that would follow.
Which leads us up to the 1994 genocide against the Tutsis.
Yes.
It's a really profoundly difficult topic, but it's essential for us to understand.
It is essential.
So in a period of just 100 days,
100 days.
between April and July 1994, over 800,000 Tutsis and moderate Hutus were systematically massacred.
It's a staggering number.
Yeah, and the triggering event was the assassination of President Habyarimana on April 6, 1994.
Yes.
And that one act unleashed this wave of just unimaginable violence and brutality.
It did. It's just sobering to consider how a society can descend into such widespread brutality so rapidly.
And the genocide finally ended when the RPF, led by Paul Kagame, gained control in July 1994.
That's right.
What a huge task to rebuild after that.
Absolutely.
How did they even begin?
Well, the immediate aftermath saw the formation of a government of national unity.
Okay.
And they had a really tough job. They had to foster reconciliation among a deeply traumatized population,
All right.
ensure justice for the perpetrators, and rebuild the foundations of Rwandan institutions.
Justice on such a massive scale.
Absolutely.
That must have been a really huge challenge. How did they even begin to address that?
Well, what's particularly noteworthy here is the introduction of the Gakaka court system.
Okay.
And these were community-based traditional courts that were revived and adapted to process the sheer volume of genocide cases.
Wow.
And it was a unique and in many ways groundbreaking approach to dealing with mass atrocities,
Okay.
emphasizing community involvement in the pursuit of justice.
Gakaka.
Yes,
Really important and unique element of Rwanda's recovery.
it is.
So beyond this pursuit of justice, how did they start to rebuild and move forward?
Well, the government launched these very ambitious economic recovery programs
Okay.
and long-term development strategies, most notably Vision 2020, which aimed to transform Rwanda's economy and society.
Vision 2020.
Yeah. Furthermore, the adoption of the 2003 Constitution
Okay.
was a pivotal moment,
Okay.
emphasizing national unity and banning political parties based on ethnicity.
Wow.
So a direct response to the devastating divisions of the past.
So they were really trying to break free from the cycle.
Absolutely.
Wow. So from these early clans
Yeah.
to the centralized kingdom
Yeah.
through the disruptions of colonial rule
Of course.
and this just unimaginable tragedy of the genocide.
Yeah.
Rwanda's journey up to the 20th century is a very complex one,
It is.
a multifaceted one,
That's-
and at times a very tragic one.
Absolutely.
And as we look back on this historical period,
Yes.
what stands out in all of our sources
Yeah.
is this Rwanda's history, despite the pain and conflict,
Yeah.
is a story of resilience, strength, and a journey towards rebirth.
It really is. It's about unity and rebirth.
And a better future.
And a better future.
And while we've reached the 20th century in our deep dive today, it's clear that the post-genocide era and Rwanda's current standing on the global stage are important topics.
Absolutely.
And we're going to explore that at another time.
We will.
But as you consider all these historical shifts in Rwandan identity and governance,
Yes.
what single factor do you think has shaped its trajectory into the 21st century?
It's a crucial question for you to ponder.
As Rwanda continues to write its own story.
Exactly.
Thanks for listening
Okay.
to The Deep Dive. Bye.